And now, time for our special guest segment on Zelda, the series. However, it is important to note that Tears of the Kingdom, the latest game for Zelda, did release May 12th of this year. Our special guest segment will be covered by Zack. And I understand, Brian, you are a Zelda fan as well. So, gentlemen, this segment is for you. But I'd like to kick us off, if I may, get us started. I looked back at the history of the game and I really found it interesting. There was a need, rather, for a game, and an early prototype was being designed for development of dungeons. And this prototype ended up becoming a game. The prototype was to be able to build dungeons for your friends to explore, and it turned into the Zelda games. The significance of the name Link is to bring people together to explore dungeons. The element of dungeon is very important, and it's important in Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. And the first game was Legend of Zelda, that released February 21st of 1986. There are approximately 20 games in the series. Longevity of time to cover, but the games have come, the series has come a very long way. Zach, let me turn it over to you first and talk about the series and Tears of the Kingdom.
Well, if you're around my age, you probably started with the original that came out in '87, but I didn't. I chose the masochistic route of starting with Zelda 2 at 5 years old with my uncle, or my great uncle, and there was a summer where he was my babysitter and we played Zelda 2 all summer, and it was so difficult, and it was my introduction to not only Zelda but really video games. I think I probably played Mario by then, but that was my first Zelda, and as difficult and as difficult as that game is and frustrating, it was great. I still remember every minute of it. I still play through it. That's where I started, and I've picked up each one since Ocarina. Probably played every single console game, none of the spin-offs, but all the story games I've pretty much played and finished.
Brian, any thoughts on Zelda, the series, and playing the games?
You could not have described Zelda 2: The Adventures of Link in any better way. That game was just, yeah. So that was actually the first Zelda game I ever beat. Because for some reason we had Link, but we never had the original Zelda in my house. It was when we visited family that I played Zelda. But yeah, since Zelda 2, I played pretty much every Zelda game, minus I will say I did not play any of the GameCube ones because that was the one Nintendo console I skipped was GameCube.
Underrated. Wind Waker.
But yeah, but now they've got the port on the Switch, so I can go back and play that now. But yeah, I love the series. I'd probably say my favorite Zelda game overall would probably be either Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask.
Ocarina of Time is just so classic. It really took it into the future beyond side-scrolling games, 2D games that I grew up with. It really just kind of opened it up like Mario 64 in a way, but to adventure games more so than platformers. Ocarina will always be the top of my list, no matter what.
Especially with the transition between Kid Link and Adult Link, and just like it was just so good.
Yeah, really set the stage. Now, what's interesting in the last two games is the introduction of voice acting, which they never had. Different sound effects and things like that, but you just were reading text as we're seeing in some of these screens. And now that they've actually fully fleshed out the characters, it's really interesting with the styles they've chosen. Instead of going realistic, they've gone with a very unique art style. Character introductions remind me of anime. I'm not that big into anime, but that's what it reminds me of. And so I really like the direction that they've taken it, just from an aesthetics point of view.
Oh, absolutely. I question I question their choice on the voice of Ganondorf, though. Jerry Dorf is, or if you're an Archer fan, the voice of Cyril. Oh god, I can't
Is it
take him
villainous
serious.
enough? Is that the reason you say that?
It's an interesting transition from those two characters to Ganondorf.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that.
What scares me is that Nintendo had a lot of success with the Mario movie, and if they try to do any other of their series like Zelda, and they're going to have to do what no one's ever done is give Link a voice, and that I just know they're going to
There's
screw that
actually a
up. Or I hope
series
they
in
don't,
planning.
but
There's a series in planning.
you know there is.
Allegedly, there's a series in planning.
Now they're going to do Kirby because it's more towards their main audience. But if they do Zelda, that terrifies me. But no, it's fair point. It's not for everybody.
Zelda is one of the ones in planning. Allegedly, with I think they said it was possibly with Netflix.
We'll see. But I've been playing this game all weekend. It's been excellent. The boss fights are excellent. The evolution of the series, kind of going back to its roots, but also Breath of the Wild and in the original Legend of Zelda, you just kind of wander around, find your own adventure, which isn't for everybody. Tears definitely adds a little more linear style. You got to go through the story, which I think they're doing a top-notch job with. Boss fights are memorable. I mean, we haven't started talking about the construction. And Lord knows YouTube will provide you with lots of interesting construction videos. But it's just a really well-rounded game. Lots of love, lots of polish. We were giving Blizzard a lot of praise earlier. A Nintendo game's going to have that polish too.
Speaking of construction, I think it was an IGN source article that to complete the puzzles, people are just building bridges to actually circumnavigate, the need to actually solve the puzzle. So I don't know if you encountered the fortune that bridges can bring to the puzzles in the game.
Well, it's a Twitter meme at this point over the weekend that, when in doubt, build a bridge, basically. There's been some obnoxiously long ones that are sort of breaking the physics of the game. But, do whatever you want. If that's what someone wants to spend, like it would probably take you at least 30 minutes to build some of these ridiculously long, what is just a long pole or a bridge. So, if that's how you want a game, then go for it. And that's what Nintendo's providing you is just go through the story, go build a long bridge, or go build some other crazy things you can find on the internet. There was some videos of a tank and a stealth bomber. I guess more late game stuff. Spoiler alert, but everything's on the internet now. But it's a lot of fun. It's a great evolution of the series. It's not they're not reinventing anything.
Let's talk about another concern that fans have had, where the elements of this game draw too heavily from Breath of the Wild, and I say too heavily where it's a reskinned Breath of the Wild, same game but different title. And not all fans feel this way, but some of them do. Have you found that this is just another Breath of the Wild, or is it something unique in its own that builds upon Breath of the Wild and extends the journey?
It's the word I used and that I borrowed from an article I read was a great evolution of Breath, and I was worried about that too. It's the first Zelda with the same map going into consecutive games. Worried that could be a retread. You got the same, pretty much the same Hyrule with about somewhere between 3 to 5 years elapsed. So there's lots of different changes, new things. They built more communities, had more people. So there's been a lot of evolutions of it. It's not just a Breath retread. Spoiler alert. You obviously know you're in the sky, but there's also a whole nother level. So there's a lot of different, literally, levels to this game. With the addition of the dungeons, it really goes back to its roots, but also is a great evolution of the freedom that Breath brought you.
And speaking of the variation of levels, I talked about in one of the daily gaming updates last week, I think it was the one for the 12th upon the game's release, that the dungeons are unique compared to the ones in Breath of the Wild, because at least one of them, when you're jumping high, diving down into Hyrule, it triggers an event. Are you finding dungeons have events in them, or this is just some of them that do? The uniqueness of the dungeons compared to Breath of the Wild. Thoughts on that?
The Wild only had from what I can remember, the 4 main dungeons with the beasts that you had to unlock. Maybe a couple other dungeons. The Yugi clan, you could maybe call that a dungeon. That was frustrating. But this really has the old style dungeons. And what I found surprised and delighted about the most is that they were in places I didn't expect them to be, at least in this point in the map, or in the campaign where I'm at on the map. So, I don't know if I want to get into too many spoilers, but you're going one place and then all of a sudden you realize you've got to go to a completely different area to get into the actual dungeon. And it was, as frustrating or weird as that may sound, not to give things away, it's really interesting how they all pull it off. And I haven't gone on a fetch quest yet or anything like that. No repetition. Maybe Breath had some frustrating repetition with the swords and stuff like that breaking all the time, but the dungeons are spot on. They're memorable. Some of the repetitions you can criticize Breath of the Wild for have been, there's another evolution to them in this game that makes it a little more playable, or a lot more, that's a bad way to put it. Make it, a lot more intuitive.
Bob, Richard, any thoughts you have on Tears of the Kingdom? Now, Richard, you told me you wanted to pick this up. You were going to go all out with the collector's edition, I think. You were going to pull a me, basically.
Well, I don't even own a Switch. I've never been a big Nintendo console person, but I do love me some Zelda. My first Zelda was A Link to Joy. And yeah, I saw a trailer for this, and I'm really contemplating about going out, buying a Switch, and buying this game. So,
and that's significant that this game captivated you to consider that.
Yeah, and just the conversation I just heard just now is kind of swaying me in that direction. I'm not going to lie.
All right, Richard's going out. He's buying a Switch. Hopefully, if the Zelda ones are available, they look really neat. The themed ones, collector's edition ones. Yeah.
Did anybody happen to see that Nintendo Australia commercial that came out like the day before, last maybe Wednesday or Thursday? It was like the middle-aged guy that goes to work in his suit, riding the bus, and he gets home, he plays Zelda at night, and then he's riding on the bus playing his Switch, and he looks out the window, and it's just like he's, I don't know,
in the world of Hyrule.
That
right?
commercial really spoke to me. I really loved that commercial, but I'm also a really big Zelda fan, if you can't tell.
It's interesting how elements in our reality and everyday life, they could remind us of the games we play, and for a moment, a whim, we actually feel we are in those games. So that resonates with me. It's the merging of games and the real world, the non-virtual world. But these games, they are metaphoric and they are allegories of our lives, what happens in the real world. They're just very illustrative. So it plays on that. Brian, are you going out and buying it? Richard is. You two can team up. Both of you are. Yeah, you could do that.
Can't team up in Zelda.
No, I meant team up and go buy it.
Oh. I was actually just looking at the price of the limited edition Switch.
There you go, Zach. You're doing it. It's happening. It's happening here on the channel. 2 people maybe going out. Is it sold out? I thought it was.
No,
it's not. Okay.
No, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Target.
Well, there you go. It's still available. So if you were thinking about it, you weren't sure, and you are watching this video or listening to this on podcast as of right now, it's available.
Great adventure.
Great adventure. Any other thoughts on this guest segment? Any other avenues, areas to explore with Link and Peach? And
I would honestly love to see. I would love to see them go back and do a Switch version of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and just bump them up to the same graphic design for Tears of the Kingdom and the other game. Just have it be the same graphic style, but just update it to that.
Doing that with all the other ones.
I disagree. I think part of what makes all the Legend games so iconic is they all, for the most part, have very their own very unique graphics and look. Like one Zelda game doesn't really look like another one. I think that's what helps keep. If they all have this exact same art style, I think they'll just start blending them together, and people they won't be as memorable.
Well, not necessarily cloning it using the same, textures and things like that, but the same type of cell shading they've been doing with this and with the Wind Waker.
This all started after this. What was it? The Space something 2000 Space World 2000 Expo, where they played what the GameCube graphics could be, 23 years ago, and they played a 30-second long video of Link and Ganondorf fighting off, and everybody was like, "Wow, that's what the next Zelda game is going to look like. It's going to be great." A year later, you got cell shading and you got the Wind Waker, and it turned a lot of people off. But that game is underrated. You were saying earlier that all the Zelda games have a different aesthetic style to them, and that stands out on each generation of console.
Mm-hmm.
But they're always going to feel like a Zelda game, and the Wind Waker was just as much of an adventure as this one is. It has its own limitations for the time, but that turned everybody off when they went to cell shading. They've slowly gotten more realistic or really just different style now, but that was a turning point.
I think my favorite graphic design in a Zelda game was probably Twilight Princess.
I agree.
Because it was kind of a good blend between, some of it was very obvious cell shading and some of it was semi-realistic. And it was just enough of a blend to where it worked. And I mean, this is kind of riding the same coattails, but it does get a little bit more cartoony. So I don't know. I would like to see them go back to realism and a little bit closer to realism, how they used to do it. I do think the cell shading, I get why they're doing it. It's a hardware constraint because it's mobile hardware. If they ever went back to a hybrid console, I think you might start seeing more realism in the games again. But yeah, it's down the road. We'll see what happens.
I can't tell you, despite the Switch's limitations compared to everything else that you can fire up nowadays, you play this on a 75-inch 4K TV and it looks beautiful.
And that's due to the technology of the Switch, I take it.
I have the first generation Switch too, so it's not one of the newer ones.
Okay. So it's the game itself.
No, it's still going to run 30 to 35 frames, and if you get a lot of baddies on the screen, it's going to drop a little bit. So we were talking tech specs earlier. You're not going to get 60 frames out of this, but it's going to look pretty.
PC port.
Well, apparently there's emulators now, so
yeah.
I don't ever try any of that stuff, but I've seen headlines.
Yeah.
And the scrolls.
You don't ever want to be on the so Nintendo is almost as bad as Sony when it comes to the copyright stuff. But they go after a lot of the folks that install like whatever the latest generation of their consoles are. The emulators that come out for that, they will literally track down everyone who's downloaded it.
Yep, absolutely. I got some good lawyers.
Sounds like it. Indeed. Well, Tears of the Kingdom and Zelda, the series. How far it's come, where it's been, and the game you can play now.